Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about here, that is in direct response to the head right system slash indentured servant program, is Bacon's Rebellion. As the head right system and indentured servitude is in progress, things slow down a little bit as far as the colonies are concerned, or certainly the Virginia colony or Jamestown colony. But as more and more migration comes in under this system, there again, it is eventually going to create what you need to know, of course, as class stratification. So what you're going to see here, there again, people with money, as you see on the notes here, can come into the colony through the head right system. They pay their way, they get the 50 acres of land, and they're well on their way as far as, developing what they're looking for. Of course, people with no money, it has to follow the indentured servant contract that you should be familiar with by now through the lecture, through the assignment, and even the guided reading. There again, they would have to work as much as 5 to 7 years of hard labor. Remember that in the notes, 1 out of 10 would be able to carry out that contract. So that's pretty clear as far as the degree of difficulty to be able to work out that contract. But what you're going to need to see here is that this has the tendency to create a class system. You're going to have people who have money against people who don't have money. And the people who do have money are going to be more stationed in and around the Tidewater region of Virginia, the coastal area. They're going to be referred to as the Tidewater elite. They're going to be the people who demonstrate the power and the wealth. And then, of course, the indentured servant is going to only inhabit the western land, what we would associate as the frontier. So just west, of course, of that coastal area, you're going to see that the soil was relatively poor for farming, but the biggest problem, at least for the English are concerned, is 4 to 5 Native American tribes. And this is going to create what you would say a relatively hostile situation. So the indentured servant feels like that he gets, of course, the short end of the stick, and feels as if his rights are undermined, and this is going to lead to what you would say the development of a militia to try to stand up and fight for what they feel like should be rightfully theirs. So by 1670, the feelings of being ignored are extremely high. They feel as if they're being taxed heavily. They're again being taxed without any form of representation. That sounds very familiar. Of course, their rights are extremely undermined. There again, very important situation here in colonial America, because there again, from your writing, you're going to be able to jump time periods and make synthesis connections here. So very important here. So there again, a 1670 taxation without representation. Their rights are being ignored. So it sounds very familiar when we jump into, of course, the late 1700s. Now, women were very scarce at this particular time in coming to the Jamestown colony. But when women did enter into the colony, they tend to marry the Tidewater elites. So the Westerner, if you will, the indentured servant, feels as if he's getting the shaft on every end. He has to settle for poor farming, geographical region, surrounded by Native Americans, which there again creates hostilities. And of course, he has a very difficult time marrying. So these are worlds of problems. Governor William Berkeley doesn't help the situation because he tends to be pro-elite. And he is not going to do anything to upset the Native American fur trade. So as far as Berkeley looking at the situation, he basically tells the indentured servants to suck it up and deal with it, because we're not going to mess this thing up as far as our workings with the Native Americans. So the House of Burgesses, please remember that is the first sort of representative body form of government in the colony. They're going to go a step further in this oppressive matter, at least to the frontiersmen anyway, and they will strip them of their voting rights. So there's not a whole lot of diplomacy here between the frontiersmen and, of course, the Tidewater elites, and there again the politicians who tend to side with the Tidewater elites. So what happens next? By 1676, frontiersmen will form a militia, and their leader is going to be Nathaniel Bacon. Nathaniel Bacon is not a poor farmer. He is not of the frontier stratification, so to speak. He is extremely wealthy. It would be safe to say that Nathaniel Bacon was more of the elite status. But nevertheless, one thing that Nathaniel Bacon does not have, and that is political control. And so he sort of got the shaft as far as politics is concerned in the Tidewater region. So what does he want to do? He wants to court the frontiersman, the indentured servant, if you will, and he's going to create and try to organize a militia to try to overthrow William Berkeley. Nathaniel Bacon thinks within himself that, hey, if we can overthrow him and we can get him to leave the scene, then I should be able to take over as far as the political matters is concerned. So to technically say that he has, you know, the sole interest of the indentured servant might be a little bit in question. I think that Nathaniel Bacon had his own personal reasons as why he done what he done, and that was, you know, for political advancements. But nevertheless, he is at least able to convince many of the indentured servants that he's fighting for them, and so they get on board with that. And so what happens next? They start to massacre Native Americans. They start to approach Jamestown. They have Jamestown in their sights, and they create a standoff between Governor Berkeley. So you've got a showdown, literally, you know, face to face with Bacon and Berkeley. And Berkeley, I think, primary sources say that he sticks his chest out and says that if you're going to shoot me, then go ahead and shoot me. So we ratchet up the hostilities between the two. So they start to come to Jamestown and really start to make their threats, etc. By then, the voting rights of the indentured servant or frontiersman would be reinstated, but they've already got the wheels turning, and Bacon and his rebels are wanting rid of the governor. Very important that you see starred here, July 30th. They establish, of 1676, they establish what is known as the Declaration of the People of Virginia. Make sure that you write that down, okay? The Declaration of the People of Virginia. The whole purpose or the thesis behind all of it was the protection from corrupt political elites. So that sounds very, very familiar, all right? So there again, if you're making synthesis connections in your writings, certainly you have good writing points in Bacon's Rebellion, and it is very familiar as far as what shakes down with the British some 100 years later. All right, so Nathaniel Bacon, it creates the Declaration of the People of Virginia. So there again, they have something now that they can stand in front of corrupt political elites with, and, you know, declare that they are unfair. So Nathaniel Bacon is going to rally 400 to 500 men, and they are going to Jamestown, and they are going to burn it. And so after the burning of Jamestown, William Berkeley will flee and leave the scene, and all seems well with Bacon and his rebels. But unfortunately, things go south in a hurry. Physically speaking, for Nathaniel Bacon, because he is struck down with dysentery, and yes, he will poop himself to death. So there again, Bacon's rebellion ends, as far as his sickness, as a result of their leader being struck down and pooping himself to death. England organizes, comes to Jamestown, and starts to take back the reins or take back control of what they were losing. Bacon's rebellion fails. 23 people would be hanged in this situation. First, you need to know the causes, and of course we've given you that, but lastly, you need to be able to see the effects. So make sure you write these effects down as far as on your notes, because they are of utmost importance. The effects here, number one, they do expose a class tension and the problems that class systems can manifest as a result of people coming in with money in comparison with no money. So eventually, Bacon's rebellion will lead to the end of the head rot system, and the indentured program will come to an abrupt end. And so by 1619, we're already introducing the African slave labor into the Jamestown colony, but that will really start to explode and grow as a result of the head rot and indentured program coming to an end. So that is what you need as far as Bacon's rebellion. You definitely need to know the causes, and you need to know the effects of that showdown there. So plantation owners gradually replaced the indentured servant with the African slave. That's probably the key consequence of this rebellion. All right, so that should have everything that you need there with Bacon's rebellion. We're going to move over again to the smart board here, and I'll turn the lights off. And we will move on through just some briefings as far as these colonies are concerned. And so let me move it up just a little bit here. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about here is Maryland. All right, it starts working now anyway. Maryland is the first one that we're going to look at here. Just give you some brief information about that. Hope that's good that you can see that there. It looks like it's okay. All right. So Maryland, you need to know, was founded by Lord Baltimore. Now, it is a proprietary colony. You were either a royal colony or a proprietary colony. And of course, if you were lucky enough to be a charter colony, you would probably have the most form of self-governance. But I think there were only 2 of the original 13 colonies who were charter colonies. Now, so this means that Maryland was a proprietary colony, so that the land was given by the king to his friends or people who were close to him. Please remember that Jamestown colony, which would eventually of course become Virginia, was operated by the joint stock companies. So there's really no funding from businesses for the Maryland colony. It is proprietary. The land becomes into the possession of the king, and he will, there again, issue this land out to his proprietor. And of course, the proprietor would be Lord Baltimore. So there again, founded in 1634, Maryland was the second plantation colony and the 4th overall colony to be formed. It was founded to be a place for persecuted Catholics to find refuge and a safe haven. Lord Baltimore would give huge estates to his Catholic relatives, but the poor people who settled there were mostly Protestant, and so there again had the tendency to create a sort of religious friction. However, Maryland did prosper, like Virginia, with the production of tobacco. Let me scroll up there just a little bit. Be glad when we get off these PDFs as far as notes. All right, so you're going to see there again a surge of Protestants that's going to happen there again in Maryland. They're going to initiate a threat towards Catholic freedom. And there again, Maryland was created for religious tolerance. So what do? They quickly go ahead and establish in 1649 the Act of Toleration. Now, this is not religious freedom. You need to know that. This is religious tolerance, not religious freedom. There again, tolerance and freedom are sort of different. Religious tolerance is saying this, that we are going to provide an element of toleration for, there again, all denominations of Christianity. Okay, so you need to know that. It guaranteed religious toleration to all Christians. Now, if you were a Jew or you were of a different religion, the decree in the Act of Tolerations would put you to death. Okay, if you were a Jew, if you were an atheist, and you didn't believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, you were killed. All right, so that's why we say that this is an element of toleration, not freedom, so to speak. So make sure that you know that. All right, that was found in the Maryland colony. And there again, if you are doing the project on Maryland and you got to come up with this advertisement, that would be a good advertising point as far as religious tolerance is concerned. So maybe that might help you out just a little bit there. All right, moving on. Maryland versus Virginia. There again, they are very similar in there again that they would prosper under the product of tobacco. And then there again, like Virginia, they're going to depend on indentured servants for labor. Like slaves came in larger numbers towards the end of the 17th century. There again, the only difference really between Maryland and Virginia, I don't know if it would be necessarily as far as labor or economically speaking. They're both very similar. One element of discrepancy here would be probably from a religious perspective and how that Maryland did implement that religious toleration for Catholic persuasion. Of course, slavery was extremely popular in both places. Okay, so moving on here, we're going to talk about the Carolinas real quick. By 1670, Carolina founded by 8 nobles. All right, so it too starts out as a proprietary colony. In England, King Charles I had been beheaded. Oliver Cromwell had ruled for 10 very strict years before tired Englishmen restored Charles II to the throne in the Restoration. After all the turmoil, Civil War, they just went back to a king. The bloody period had interrupted colonization, and Carolina was named after Charles II and was formally created in 1670. Carolina flourished by developing close economic ties with the West Indies due to the port of Charleston. And both, there again, you need to remember that the British at this time has colonies in the West Indies, and both the West Indies and the coastal part of South Carolina have very long growing seasons, and they're very similar as far as production is concerned. So they worked closely together, and they would initiate slaves from much of the Caribbean. Carolina is going to flourish by developing close economic ties with the West Indies. Many original Carolina settlers had come from Barbados and brought in the strict slave codes for ruling slaves. Now that may be in the next slide. Yes, that's in the next slide there. So rice became a principal export crop. There again, colonists would pay high prices for West African slaves. So there again, your slave labor is going to be very predominant in your Carolina colony. And of course, when we say at this time, in 1670, the Carolina colony, we're talking about both what we would associate today as of South Carolina and North Carolina. So we'll move on here. The West Indies sugar production impacts slavery in America. So there again, they are going to send eons of slaves into the Carolina region. So many original Carolina settlers had come from Barbados, as we said, and brought in the strict slave codes for ruling slaves. Here's what you need to know about the Barbados slave code. They're not protecting the slave, okay? Don't misconstrue the information. It's not for protecting the slave. It's for protecting the slave owner, all right? So the Barbados slave codes, really established in 1661, but the Carolina adopts their version of it by 1696. There again, in 1661, a concept of Barbados slave codes would relegate to the whipping of the slaves. If things doesn't get better, it would be maybe a slitting of his nose, or a burning of the face, as a deterrent, and then eventually death. All right, so, and this of course makes all that legal. So there again, the Barbados slave codes are not to protect the slave, they're to protect the slave owner and basically give, the freedom for slave owners, to do what they need to. Interestingly, Indians as slaves in Carolina was protested, but to no avail. Slaves were sent to the West Indies to work, as well as New England, and rice emerged as the principal crop in the Carolinas. Okay, so there again, and much of what we're talking about here is what we would associate in current day South Carolina, especially on the coastal side of South Carolina. All right, so tobacco versus sugar production. Tobacco was, of course, the poor man's crop, easily planted. Simple processing was 1 year. Sugar, rich man's crop, must be planted extensively, extensive refining, and then you needed money to be able to fund, that sugar. So South Carolina, was able to grow sugar a little better, of course, and they had the climate to do so, more so than what you would say Virginia and Maryland. So South Carolina had the tendency to be aristocratic. Your wealthy people would really station there, and it would be safe to say that that was a little more wealthier than most other colonies, simply because it was a region that could grow a rich man's crop. So that's good information there. North Carolina would foreshadow future revolutionary ideas. All right, so this slide gives us the emergence of North Carolina. Many newcomers to Carolina were squatters, people who owned no land but usually came down from Virginia and basically just says it looks like a good piece of property, so we're going to take it. North Carolinians develop a strong resistance to authority due to geographic isolation from neighbors, Virginia and South Carolina. Two flavors of Carolinians developed. You're going to have there again your aristocratic and wealthier down south around Charleston with the rice, indigo, and plantations. Hang on, pause right. Mr. Stewart. Good, how are you? I sure do. I sure will. Miss Knob, I sure do. You're welcome. Okay, so getting back to the note there, talking about North Carolina, there again, you got two flavors of Carolinians, aristocratic, wealthier down south and around Charleston. But the other group would be, you're strong-willed and independent-minded up north on small tobacco farms. So North Carolina, when it becomes, colonized in 1712, less reliant on slave labor, smaller scale farms, tobacco farms. So you don't have that big plantation, that large acreage, that specific crop, so to speak, that plantations would implement. So a little bit, a smaller scale. All right, so 1712, North and South Carolina were officially separated. In 1711, The Tuscarora Indians attacked North Carolina. The Carolinians responded by crushing the opposition, selling hundreds to slavery, and leaving the rest to wander north, eventually becoming the sixth nation of the Iroquois. All right, so just make sure you know your stratifications there between North Carolina. There again, most had the reputation as uncivilized people, and we as North Carolinians probably still have that today, very uncivilized and barbaric people. But we're proud of that anyway. Georgia, there again, Georgia, founded in 1733. It was the last of the 13 colonies. It was intended to be a buffer between the British colonies and the hostile Spanish settlements in Florida. There again, a high-minded group of philanthropists, mainly James Oglethorpe. So James Oglethorpe would be credited to, there again, creating this colony, doing a pretty good job as far as defense, as far as the Spanish is concerned. There again, he was a dynamic soldier statesman. He did repel several times of Spanish attacks. He saved the charity colony, and that's what it was referred to as a charity colony, as far as a penal colony. People who were in debt, who were hard on their luck, so to speak, needed a refresh or a restart, could have the ability to reside in Georgia. So that's why they call it a charity colony. All Christians except Catholics enjoyed religious toleration. Missionaries came to try to convert the Indians. Slow to develop compared to neighbors. There again, unhealthy climate, restrictions on slavery, and then had to, guard against the Spanish attacks. No slavery. Interesting enough, no slavery would be allowed in to the Georgia colony during the early parts of it anyway. There again, James Oglethorpe wanted people to be a busy people, a hardworking and a mindset, if you will. And not rely on others, but simply do for yourself. But eventually, England steps in and ousts this idea of sort of being a charter colony, and it takes a royal colony stance afterwards. And then once England gets in, and the temptation as far as, the economy is concerned, starts to create plantations, and they start to introduce the African slave labor as early as 1751. So slavery was found in all the plantation colonies by then. So that was kind of short-lived, if you will. All right, so Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia share certain characteristics. There again, the export of agricultural products, slavery, of course, large plantations gave aristocratic flavor. There again, they were very wealthy in this area because you had to have the dollars to be able, to have these plantations, whether it's sugar or whether it's, rice and what have you. Permitted some religious toleration. Church of England was the strongest. Those southern colonies, because of so much farming and agriculture, had the tendency to erode or butcher the soil on frequent occasion. All right, so that is just, a little bit of briefing about your colonies there, and we'll let you go into greater detail of that with your advertising project. So that is all of Chapter 2 notes. So for those who are remote, when you come into class tomorrow, all we're going to do is let you finish up any assignments. And as of Monday, I would be ready for a quiz on Chapter 2. We'll go ahead and get that out of the way, and then we're probably going to have some kind of short assessment for Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. That will be in a form of a test. So be studying, sort of be ready for that. All right, have a good day.